punished by the adjective hybrid, hejin, a word which carries particularly negative denotations and connotations in Arabic. It's enough to say that one of the meanings of hejin is la'im. Al-hejin huwa al-la'imu. Adonis' impassioned vindication of the form was met with skepticism and hostility, a sentiment shared by Mahmoud Darwish's caustic attack on Arabic poetry in his article "Anqiduna min hada ash-sha'b," or Al-Bayati's sarcastic reaction against Adonis' collection of poems Mufradatun bi Sighat al-Jama'. I quote Bayati, who says, "I couldn't read it. It's neither poetry nor prose, but a third hybrid genre, jinsun hejinun, lacking imagery, idea, or experience." End quote. The hybridity of the genre is clearly the source of this revulsion and scorn. Even though Adam Fathi belongs to a poetic movement called the Third Creative Wind, al-Rih al-Ibdahiyya al-Thalitha, founded in the First Congress of Poetry in Hammamet in 1982, his work has its roots in Harakat al-Tabi'a, the vanguard movement. This movement, which was active between 1968 and 1972, was preoccupied with questions of poetic rhythm and deviated partially or entirely from Al-Khalil's prosodic system. Poets in that period engaged in revolutionizing poetry by proposing new patterns such as Al-Kitaba al-Shamila, which advocated breaking down the borders between all forms of creative expressions. I locate the blind glassblower, in this encompassing form of writing based on mixing, bricolage, and collage. Indeed, while the book functions as a potpourri, amalgamating disparate issues, seemingly disparate issues, and therefore offers a classic collection of poems, it also straddles two different genres, autobiography and poetic cycle. The autobiographical impulse in The Blind Glassblower is announced by the subtitle, His Days and Words, Ayamuhu wa A'maluhu. The book chronicles the poet's everyday life, his anxieties, his artistic figure, the artistic figures he cherishes, as well as reminiscences of different members of his family. The reader is introduced to his mother, Turkiya, nicknamed Traki, and his father, Ali, in Paris Nabzawa. His grandmother, who bequeathed him her power of storytelling, appears in The Missing Eye and Ainul Nafisa. The book also offers a passionate song for love for his wife Nediha in a very beautiful poem, Mindilu Nediha, and a tender poem about his daughter May. Baudelaire's conception of the arrangement of his prose poems in Paris spleen can seamlessly be applied to Adam Fathi's organization of his book. I quote Baudelaire again, "We can break off where we choose. I my reverie, you the manuscript, the reader his reading. Remove a vertebra, and the two parts of my tortuous fantasy join effortlessly. Chop it into several pieces, you will see that each survives on its own." Indeed, while each poem in Fathi's is a standalone text, the book as a whole operates within a continuum or a poetry cycle akin to a short story cycle in terms of narrative techniques. The short story cycle, itself a hybrid genre, resists precise definition and occupies an odd, ambiguous place between the short story and the novel. While The Blind Glassblower is the major persona piecing the poems together, the book creates a complex network of cross-references arising from the interplay between the recurrent images, characters, and themes. The blind glassblower is obviously a metaphor for the poet. Blindness functions on two levels. First, it's a nod to the great blind Arab poets like Al-Ma'ari or Bashar al-Luburt, as well as blind Western writers and poets like Homer and Milton. Second, it stands as a trope of dissidence as the poet refuses to take part in a corrupt world. This idea, which traverses the whole book, is best illustrated in his poem Kitbul Ashya'i, a phrase referring to the proverb يعرف من أين تؤكل الكتف. So I read here: انفخ روحك في قصبتك، افرح بأنك الأعمى. ليس مهما أنك لا ثمن الرغيف المر تعرف، لا ثمن اللدغة، لا ثمن النجمة تحور في سمائهم. المهم أن تعرف أنك مهما رقصت عليهم لا تقدر بثمن. The act of blowing resurrects the ancient description of poetry as a handicraft, a word reminiscent of a bricolage that takes us back to the lexical field of hybridity. Poetic composition is considered sinaa in the Old Arabic tradition. Qudam ibn Sha'far equates it with carpentry, nijara, and forging silver, siyahat al-fudda. The extended metaphor of glass blowing serves as a traveling theme that connects the different poems. Adam Fathi opens his book with a short poem titled The Blind Glass Blower, first movement, and closes it with The Blind Glass Blower, second movement. While written in a simple style that conforms to a little girl asking her blind father how he writes or how he can find his way, the two poems, adopting a Sufi-like style, are rather complex and invite deep reflection. So, نافخ زجاج الأعمى حركة أولى. تسأل الطفلة أباها كيف تكتب؟ كان أعمى. أنظر في نفسي طويلا إلى أن أرى ثقبا في الصفحة. أضع على الثقب كلمة. أنفخ في الكلمة كي تكبر قليلا. هكذا أحصل أحيانا على قصيدة. ثم ماذا؟ لا شيء سوى أني قد أقع في الثقب فلا أعود. The poem shows that the act of poetic creation is not only arduous in the sense that it takes time and effort, but also hazardous as the poem can engulf the poet. Writing acquires a Sufi meaning of al-fana, passing away or annihilation. The second movement corroborates the poet's mystic experience by using the word tariq, road or path, reminiscent of the Sufi tariqa, a spiritual road towards knowledge. Then نافخ زجاج الأعمى حركة ثانية. تسأل الطفلة أباها كيف ترى طريقك؟ كان أعمى. أضيع في نفسي طويلا إلى أن أشعر بخيط الضوء. أضع على الضوء فمي. أنفخ في الخيط كي يكبر قليلا. هكذا أحصل أحيانا على طريق. ثم ماذا؟ لا شيء سوى أني قد أذهب إلى آخر الخيط ولا أصله. Drawing on Sufi discourse and style shows another aspect of the hybrid impulse in Fathi's poetry. His inclination to obfuscate generic lines finds resonance in confronting the reader with texts offering different and different meaning. And here I reach my conclusion, hopefully in time. Starting from the premise that hybridity is a creative pollination based on mixing disparate elements, I tried in this paper to highlight the hybrid quality in Adam Fathi's poetry. As I'm dealing with texts written in Arabic, I'm aware that the Arabic word for hybridity, hajin, doesn't lend itself well to my rather metaphorical deployment of the term. In fact, my reading is predicated on an attempt to hybridize the word hajin and fertilize it with Latin and Greek etymologies, all while capitalizing on the term's potential of multiplicity and creativity. Reading Adam Fathi's poetry from this perspective aligns with the poet's own description of the act of reading. I quote, "This is what I mean by liberated reading, and I could have used the word liberating as well. It's a creative dialogue with the world, with the self and with the other. It's a platform for critical consciousness, a catalyst for creativity, a space to resist subordination, and a training ground for freedom and responsibility." End of quote. For Adam Fathi, reading, like writing, is a stand and an action. Adam Fathi's poetic experience combining the political and the personal, the private and the public, the secular and the Sufi, the simple and the erudite, the mundane and the philosophical, has positioned him as one of the major intellectual and literary figures of the Tunisian creative scene since the 1970s. The hybrid side of his poetry, based on crossing generic borders in the pursuit of innovation and renovation, operates as an event in its philosophical sense, a moment of change and interruption. Viewed as a whole, Adam Fatki's Yubra represents such a moment anchored in subversion and dissent. This moment of rebellion against the pure and the static is best illustrated in the following lines. This is from the Moor al-Mashraha. هل تريدون أن أعبد السفرة أن أكون مثلكم معقما أملسا? The poet's use of the adjective sterilized, a pertinent wordplay amalgamating disaffection and sterility, places his poetry in a hybrid paradigm that rejects purity in favor of fertile and fertilizing processes of creativity. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dris, for this rich and insightful presentation. I think it was a very beautiful and poetic evasion. This is an immense opportunity for you to open a discussion. So I think Professor Dris would like to take a few questions from the audience. So yes.
Yes, please.
Professor